Hello, everyone. We should be streaming now. And now we're going to be talking about pages 27 to 36. And this is the planting of English America. Right. So it's interesting to note that England was actually a latecomer to being an empire. And internal changes in the 1500s set the stage for overseas expansion. That's sort of a key theme. But in the 16th century, Spain and Portugal were ones who dominated global exploration. And England was kind of in a domestic turmoil because of Henry the Eighth, I believe. He had a little bit of a schism with the church, Catholic Church, and this sort of distracted the focus from outside. It was actually England was focused on consolidating internal power. In 1588, the Spanish Armada under Queen Elizabeth the First, defeated the Spanish Armada, and this marked a turning point in England actually becoming a naval power. So okay, so Elizabeth energizes England. So yeah, okay. Elizabeth energizes England. Queen Elizabeth I was a symbol of English nationalism and Protestantism, which is very common in England compared to other countries where Catholicism is more popular, such as Spain. Sir Francis Drake was a really famous uh, privateer, I believe they call them. Basically, a piracy with royal approval, right? The kings are okay with it, and they raid Spanish ships. And what is a joint stock company? That's where like multiple merchants come together and form a company to sort of fund the sort of colonization efforts and eventually um get return, right? Okay, so enclosure moment, that basically displaced the peasant farmers. They had to move, and this pushed them to try to seek out colonial opportunities. And only eldest sons inherited land. So the younger sons were like, "All right, we got to go try to seek our future abroad." That's just how it is. So population boom, and especially economic downturn, and the collapse of wool trade, especially, basically pushed people to try their luck and go colonize. And there's some very big, honestly, writers who tried to push people. One that's I read about in a very interesting article was Richard Hakluyt, I believe it's pronounced. I was reading this article about how he was a Protestant writer, and he basically said you should colonize. Need to go and colonize because that is how you can spread Protestantism, and that is how you can relieve urban poverty. You can go to other countries, colonize them, and y'all will be rich. Y'all will be good. Okay, so Jamestown, Virginia. That was founded by the Joint Stock Company, Virginia Company of London, and location was swampy, disease-ridden, and surrounded by powerful Powhatan tribes. Challenges were a lot of people died, not 100% well planned, and many of the settlers were like not ready for that kind of life. But John Smith, basically was basically telling them to. He basically managed to unite the people. He told everyone to work, and John Rolfe found tobacco, and that's a cash. That's what you call a cash crop, a crop that makes a bunch of money. And this basically created a cash crop economy that would, in the future, actually lead to define the South. If you see cotton in the future and crops such as molasses in the West Indies, and there were a little, they were. So, what was the cultural clashes like there? Because for the Indians, they were already pretty chilling. There was a confederacy by Chief Powhatan, and it was all they were speaking a language that was called Algonquian, and there was basically I think two main wars. The first Anglo-Powhatan War between 1610 to 1614, and Pocahontas eventually married John Rolfe to end these sort of hostilities. But there was a second Anglo-Powhatan War which ended tribal power in Virginia. I think that's a little bit sad, but yeah. Anyway, the Indians' New World. Let's talk about that. So the Indians eventually managed to get horses, guns, metal tools, and reshape their lives because tribes such as there are tribes that were basically middlemen in trade with the Europeans. The Catawba are one of them, but unfortunately, it wasn't really sustainable because demographic collapse happened, and smallpox, measles, and other European disease just decimated their populations. So tribes tried to reorganize, but it was very, very, very difficult. And Virginia eventually became the tobacco was basically the economic engine of Virginia, and this created a really demand for cheap labor when it was first filled by indentured servants under the headright system. Um, so the headright system, right? What was that? So basically, they gave land to settlers who paid for their passage of to the American colonies, right? So you pay for your passage, you get some land, and you gotta work too. Basically, how that works, rather to say rather colloquially. And social effects was the wealth inequality between landowners and landless former servants was really high, and the House of Burgesses was the first representative assembly in English America. Slavery. Records state the first African Americans came around the early 1620s or 1619, but slowly and slowly they got more slaves, and this made sense because more cheap labor leads to less costs, which leads to and these cash crops are so you can sell them on such a high margin that they were making a bunch of money. Okay, um, so let's talk about Maryland and North Carolina. Maryland was by some Catholics. Um, Lord Baltimore in 1634, and he passed the Act of Toleration in 1649, which protected all Christians but condemned non-Christians to death, which is obviously they didn't particularly like these Native Americans because they obviously weren't Christians. I believe they had their own religious systems, fragmented religious systems. It wasn't very centralized. But some of them believed in some types of animism, but some believed in spirits, and some believed more different types of things. But yeah, they grew tobacco in Maryland. They had slaves, they had indentured servants. North Carolina, they split off from South Carolina in 1712. They had a lot of squatters, small farmers, religious dissenters. So it was more democratic, independent minded. It fought with the Tuscarora and Yamasee tribes, and they collapsed the native resistance in the region. Okay, review points. Let's see. To be honest, the Jamestown was mostly economic motivation, but other places in New England were mostly religious. Tobacco really helped propped up the native system and it crushed the Native Americans because it just led to further and further colonization. Yeah, I think that's good. So I just wanted to thank you guys for watching this live stream on Apush pages 27 to 36, and see you guys later.